The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spagnola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. This podcast is a complement to the Numinous School, my online intuition development course for people who want their self-awareness to serve a greater good. I'm your host, Carmen Spagnola, and as I edit this show today, it's a very special day. It's Samhain, Halloween. The veil between the world of the living and the dead is thinner today than any other time of the year, and that's why it's followed in so many traditions by festivals like Dia de los Muertos and All Saints' Day, followed by All Souls' Day, if you're in a Catholic tradition, Dziady in Slavic countries like Poland and Belarus, for example. So today I'm doing extra lavish altars and offerings for my ancestors. I have an ancestor tree, a giant ash tree in my yard where I hang cluties, the Scots Gaelic version of prayer flags. They're prayer ribbons, really. And that's where I give my prayers and offerings. And so for the last couple days, I've been giving the first bite of my dinner to my ancestors, along with an offering of milk, very traditional, and a prayer from the Carmina Gadelica, a book of incantations from the Scottish Highlands. Today I'm making more special traditional foods, and I'm offering the first bite of every meal. And tonight I'll offer some Scotch whiskey because, of course, we're a drinking culture, the Scots. I wonder what my neighbors think, hey, when I'm like walking out in my bathrobe in the morning with like a cup of tea and scones. Anyway, so yeah, tonight I'm going to offer a little dram of Scotch. And I've got an arrangement with the ancestors of the land I'm on to do so. So, of course, that may not be totally appropriate if you live in North America. Alcohol, not so great for the ancestors of this land. But I have an arrangement where I can do that on the high holy days of the Wheel of the Seasons where I live. Actually, it's been a while since I've acknowledged the ancestors of the land I'm on air. So this seems like a perfect and important time to do so. I'm very fortunate to be a longtime visitor on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And when I drive around these lands, like within 20 minutes, half an hour, I also pass through the lands of the Senchothan speaking people. So that's the Sayote, the Tsarlip, the Pakwachin, and the Saanich First Nations. And the place where I grew up, about an hour from here, was on the traditional territories of the Hulkaminum speaking peoples, the Cowichan and Malahat First Nations. So I'm very thankful to the ancestors and the original inhabitants of this land for their graciousness to me and my family, and of course the settlers of this region. They're being very patient as we try to reconcile and figure out how to move forward together as neighbors and stewards of this place and this land. Today, my guest is the magical, radical Rachael Rice. I'm so freaking excited about this. Rachael actually converted me to the belief that yes, actually, you can love a person like kin, even if you've only met them on Facebook. Somehow we found each other and we have really honest conversations with each other about super tricky topics like whiteness and shame and parenting and partnering and social justice. And pretty much every time our conversation comes around to grief and death. So if that's exciting for you, you'll be excited for this show. I was pretty stoked when I messaged Rachael saying, hey, will you come on my show so I can ask you about your mom? And she said, yes. I connected with Rachael online. She was at home in Portland, Oregon. So, Rachael, I like to start with Desiree Attaway's question. What identities do you lead with?
Artist, woman. I was going to say artist again. Writer, teacher. Those are what I would lead with. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's segue into the other things. Maybe they'll be revealed, the stuff that you don't lead with.
Right.
Rachael, I've just known you for a year or so, maybe online, and we've become friends, like I would
Mhm.
say there's a kinship. I really love you. I really
Mhm.
love our connection. We just sort of we just jam when we see each other's on Facebook. You're like the only
Yeah.
person whose Facebook message I actually respond to right away.
That's high praise.
And yeah. So I feel like we have a kind of space between us where we can go into some good, fruitful places.
Mhm.
So can you tell me about your mom?
Thank you. Yeah. So my mom was definitely my best friend, definitely sort of the quote best person that I knew, like in terms of somebody I admired and sort of, I don't know, seemed beyond reproach to me for most of my life. And she was a hospice nurse. She was an RN. She was an RN from when I was little, and then became a nursing director for Orleans Essex VNA and hospice in northern New England in what they call the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. It's kind of the northeastern corner of the state, up near Canada where we used to live. And yeah, and she was really creative and sweet, and um, very conflict averse too. So, if she was the kind of person that, and she was from the Midwest, so she had that real kind of Midwestern ease and, comfort animal kind of personality, and was very positive. So if she was almost kind of militantly positive, like I look back on it now and go, yeah, that might have been an issue. um, so if she were to, like, if you were kind of to talk about somebody and she were to say like, oh, I don't know about her, you'd be like, whoa, hit the deck, like that person's psychopath or something. Because she's really like, she wouldn't say boo to the goose. She's just a very kind of even tempered and appreciative human. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah,
What were
and my
some of
best
your
friend.
favorite times with her? Like when you say she was your best friend,
Mhm.
what kind of stuff did you like to do with her?
She used to say that she thought of me more as a sister,
Mm.
which I thought was really interesting. Like she said that to me even as a teenager. And I have a little sister who's 7 years younger than I am, who was, just much more of like, youngest children are, was just much more the baby of the family. And I think my mom kind of, I don't know, had a different kind of relationship with the two of us. And um, so there was a lot of kind of sisterly behavior between us, whether, it was kind of like playing with makeup or like doing hair, um, or like listening to, certain music, or even kind of in playing. She liked to play. So I have,
Really? Like how? I've never had playful parents. What
I
does that look like?
It's wild. I mean, like she really would support sort of just my imagination and kind of. It's interesting because my dad was sort of the painter or the sort of self-described artist of the family, but like his aesthetic really blows. Like it's like really terrible kind of bourgeois, like very very Thomas Kincaid kind of like
Okay.
ideas of what cool art is. Very sort of um, the Philharmonic playing Pink Floyd being the sort of like classy kind of music or whatever. But my mom was very like, she was very white eyelet, very sort of um, wreaths made out of wheat and like corn husk doll, and sort of this very wholesome but kind of Midwestern minimalist sort of
Mm.
stuff, which I lean really hard into that stuff now, which is funny. Like I compulsively buy white nightgowns and stuff, like white cotton eyelet nightgowns. Mom would wear those. But I think my best memory is just like the feeling of hearing her speak with my ear to her chest.
Mm.
But she would also like, we had like a little creek in one of the houses that we used to live by. And like, she would come down and like, I'd have my little dinosaurs and like my little fairies and stuff. And she would like hang out and be like,
Mm.
look at this little piece of moss over here, and just live in that kind of wonder with me, which was
Mm.
really special without sort of, she didn't ever really like horn in or like make it about her. She was just like, well, there's this other thing you might want to check out.
Mm.
I felt very supported like that.
So how old were you and where were you and what were you doing when you found out that she was dying or died? I'm not sure what the circumstances were there.
Well, it's occurring to me right now, it's kind of making the hair go up on my neck, that we actually, I heard about her sort of terminal diagnosis right before Halloween. So it might actually,
Oh, right this time.
it might have been today.
Wow.
Yeah, because it was like the day or 2 days before Halloween. I can't remember now, but it was in 1999. So there was all that Y2K kind of like stuff. And I was having like recurring end of the world dreams. Like I was having all this like eschatological angst.
Mm.
And I was in my final year of college. So I was doing my student teaching. I was doing my practicum at Montpelier High School, where I was supposed to be, kind of getting my student teaching done for teaching middle and high school art classes in public school. And so I was in Montpelier, and my parents were in the Northeast Kingdom, which is, about 90 minutes north or so. And I got a phone call saying that from my dad's, and he was crying, which is really unusual because I think I saw my dad cry maybe twice in my life. The only other time being when he like talked about his combat in Vietnam. So I knew it was serious, but they also weren't completely clear. It was sort of like, your mom's really sick and we need you to come home. And I had no idea what to do because I had a boyfriend who was from Mexico at the time. And I kept trying to leave this really backward rural town that I kind of felt trapped in. And I kept trying to leave. I tried to leave and go to college, but I couldn't really afford it. And I tried to leave and move to New York City. And then I got the phone call that my mom was really sick. So I was like waitressing and putting myself through school. And I was really just trying to launch my life, and it all came kind of crashing down, and I had no idea what to do. I remember I got home and there were, the house was full of people and everybody's freaked out and stuff. And they were like, I remember my mom's colleague and friend took me by the shoulders and was like, we really need you to be the strong one right now. And I was like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
Because why? I don't even know what exactly is happening. My mom had what you would call a routine hysterectomy a couple of years before, and they found this encapsulated tumor, and they said they got the seed cells and the stem cells, and she was all like, thank God they did the surgery and they found this thing, and it's no big deal. And for whatever reasons, my mom never really kind of followed up or got more information or got tested in the subsequent months. Everybody just kind of thought that she was free and clear. And so by the time she was diagnosed at the end of October, it was like I didn't know at the time because people didn't really tell me, but she was gone by December 8th. So it was like by the time she got this cancer diagnosis, it was really just a few weeks until she was gone, and that was much more quick than I think I was prepared for.
Wow. What was your mother's state like? What was the dying time like? How did that change your relationship in the short time that you had left?
I was pretty self-involved, as I tend to be, and so I was a little in my own world around the whole thing and wasn't really tracking how serious it was. There was also a sort of, which is so strange because my mom was a hospice nurse, and so you'd think that there would be more conversation. But it was very when I got home, she had done some, she had done some treatment, and now I can't remember if it was radiation or chemotherapy or both or neither. One of them I think she ended up not doing because it was just so aggressive, but she had lost her hair and she looked ill. She had that look that people get. But it was she was like, we're pursuing treatment and we're going to remain positive. And
the militant positivity.
Yeah. And then it was like,
still shielding you
very much. And then, do you have any questions? That's how it was put to me.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, I have some questions, like, but I also, I didn't feel, I don't know what the word is. Safe isn't the right word, but it really felt like there was, I don't know, it felt like my parents had a need to kind of keep up appearances. And I had learned, from lifelong living with them that, there was a lot of pretending that happened in my home. And I knew that you kind of had to stick with whatever the official story was, or risk, like pulling off the narcissistic mask, which can be a pretty, violent experience. And my mom was, colluded with those dynamics a lot. And so I kind of wanted to just go with the flow and freak out internally.
Inside.
Yeah.
Were you with her when she died?
I was. I spent much of time going back and forth trying to do my student teaching and then go and take care of her. And so, yeah, I was doing, like just death work stuff, like changing diapers. She pretty rapidly declined, so that she, we had a hospital bed at home, and she was fairly unrecognizable, which now I know to be the sort of look that folks get, when they're at the end of their lives. And I was actually not present when she actually passed, but we knew that it was her time. And so what we wanted to do was have me go and get my little sister, who was in complete denial about the whole thing.
How old was she at the time?
14.
14.
Yeah. And just she couldn't even. So I went to pick her up from school. It was right. And what I did is I wore a beeper, and they're like, okay, when she passes, we're going to beep you. Because we kind of wanted to get my sister home and sort of have her be able to be there. So I wasn't there when she passed, but she had been unresponsive for many days, not eating, not drinking, so it was, I really felt like I had been there, to go from, being among us to like not being among us.
And oh my God, what was the grieving process like? How did you change?
I think I did a fair amount of like spiritual bypassing at the time. Like I would really wanted to fast forward into the lesson and the learning, and I also spent a lot of time, like even while she was dying and sort of unresponsive, like in the garage getting high with my dad. Like we smoked a lot of weed, and my dad is still late stage alcoholic. He's been, dying from alcoholism since I was a teenager. I don't know how that's possible. Like why he's still here. Like to be like cockroaches, Keith Richards, and my dad that are going to survive nuclear holocaust. Not even kidding. It's amazing. He's still walking around. But I was pretty checked out. Like I was. That's what being strong or whatever looked like. It was sort of like just, be like, I felt a certain pressure to sort of be wise or, have insight or whatever. And I also had a really, really difficult relationship with my dad. So there was a lot of stuff of like, oh, my mom set me free. I couldn't get away from my dad until because she was the only reason that I would, be around my dad, was because my mom was awesome. And so I had this whole kind of narrative of, that she was the reason why I was able to like get away from this violent, abusive parent and all this kind of stuff. And it really wasn't until, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years later that I was just like, this is an absolutely devastating, brutal experience. Because I was still kind of focused on what I wanted to do in life. I want to move to New York City. I wanted to be a big deal, and all those plans were really kind of thwarted in that. I was very kind of resentful about how I didn't get to have my life that I really wanted as a sort of gifted artist kind of person. That I was going to have to stay in this like really backwoods kind of sad, wintry place. And, and deal with like my abusive dad now being the sole parent of my little sister, who I knew was going to need, I guess I would call it rescue, which
Mm.
is exactly what ended up happening. His alcoholism really accelerated, and his mental illness really accelerated. He became much more violent, and I got a call from my sister, who was hysterical because my dad had dragged her down the stairs, like, again, and she had a bunch of marks on her body, and we had to call the cops. And
Mm.
my dad was arrested, and he was a pillar of the community. He was on the school board. He was like Dr. Erickson,
What?
Yeah, he was a big
Whoa.
deal.
And he had this like public facing persona of being clean cut, or people thought he was like the rebel doctor.
No,
Like, how did he
people
pull
thought
this off?
he was, I mean, he has a doctorate in plant physiology. So, just to be clear, that's so like the kind of thing he would say. It's like if you called him Mr. Erickson, he'd be like, that's my father. Call me Dr. Erickson. It's like just a really malignant narcissism. It's pretty intense. But yeah, he was really like, as alcoholic families often are, there's this double life thing. So he was extremely charismatic and beloved. And then at home, he was an absolute, psychopath, really, really dangerous person, violent.
That sounds so familiar.
Yeah.
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 It's like, oh gosh. Gee, I have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
what was then the moment when you realized, oh my God, I missed it.
Yeah.
My mother, that experience, I missed it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I haven't dealt with this.
Yeah.
When did that hit you?
It was way later. Like cause I got into a protracted legal custody battle with my dad over my sister, and I brought her to New York. And then she was like, this is kind of a scary place. I was living in like, pre-gentrified Williamsburg, and she's from backwoods Vermont, was like, F this. And my dad's like, if you move home, I'll buy you a car,
Oh,
So she was in foster care and stuff. And we were in this whole big, and it was a big deal because, there were a lot, it split our family. There were people were like, how could you do this to your father kind of thing? Nobody knew. Nobody knew. So you kind of see as you know me in the last year, and you see the sort of truth telling and whistleblowing type stuff that I do, you can see, how this stuff plays out now. But I basically kind of was in the drama for so many years that it wasn't until I started doing, I got a therapist is what I did. I was just like, I need help. And I started seeing therapists, and it was hard to find one that I fit real well with. And I didn't live in a big city, so my options were limited. But I was having issues around food, which my mother also did. And I was having, and my whole childhood into adulthood, and even today, there's food, weight, body image stuff. So I was doing a lot of binge eating, a lot of self-medicating with food, which is kind of how we all dealt with our dad growing up, And I started getting into therapy for it. And I started realizing, I made the connection between the amount of cannabis that I was smoking and the food that I was intaking. And so I was like, oh, well, that's easy. I'll just stop using cannabis. And I found out that I found that I couldn't stop. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize I was actually like abusing substances. And so then I got into recovery, and I started doing 12-step work. That's when I was like, oh shit, it's all this ungrieved material, And so I spent a whole bunch of years going to different 12-step groups, like, all kinds. I haven't really met one I don't like, and they're very limited. Like, I'm not, necessarily advocating. But there's some good stuff in there for, people like me that need their egos kind of broken down a bit. And it was the modality that was available to me in that time and in that place. Had I been somewhere else, maybe I would have done something more somatic or whatever.
So now I'm realizing one of the figures that I haven't asked you more about, and that I wonder where it was, is art. How was your relationship with your creativity through all of this? Were you making art through the sort of lost years? Did it play a part in your recovery?
I think that it's something that I just do, like, breathing or drinking water. Like I don't have a lot of choice around it. It's not like, okay, well, I'm going to, I'm feeling this X certain way. And so I'm going to make this X certain kind of art. It's like, it's really, I don't have much choice in the matter. Like I came across these like, these indigenous American, like American Indian, Native American folks tradition where they bite birch bark. I don't know if you've seen that. I was like, that's, I so get that. Like I still get like not necessarily having like art supplies,
Right.
But like this sort of making that happens. So yeah, I remember doing like a sketch of my mom when she was on her like quote deathbed or whatever, and that being part of, the little triptych thing that they put up when we all had to have the wake and stuff. And, yeah. And I was drawing and I mean, cause I was at the end of my college career. So I was in a lot of art classes and stuff like that, or the ones that I could afford anyways. But, I don't know. I think it's a way that it's a way that I make myself safe. And I think it's always been kind of that way where when I'm in the sort of creative flow or the creative process, it's a meditation kind of thing. It really crowds out all the other like thought forms and stuff. Cause I really have to kind of be in, in relationship to whatever is going on, in the rendering or the color or whatever.
It's interesting you say that because I'm curious how you manage the tension between being in intense engagement while also potentially being in intense dissociation and avoidance and withdrawal from the world. Like, it's like it makes you safe, but could you also be using that as a crutch at times,
sure.
or is art different? Okay.
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, what's a crutch? The medicine is poison sometimes. And I think I don't know. I was also very much always the kid that could be sketchy. I would compulsively draw. I would compulsively sketch, and I would do that in school. And some teachers would say you can do that, and some teachers would say you couldn't. And I had a few that were sort of like, "Look, you get straight A's. I don't give a shit. What you got to do," and so for me, there was a way that it occupied some kind of, I don't know, there was some hamster wheel going in my brain that like when I let that kind of roam free, that it sort of frees up, I don't know, some other space or something. So I was able to kind of focus on, information coming in while I was also sort of doing this other work. And I don't know if there's hemispheric lateralization stuff happening, or I don't actually really understand it.
But it is true that a lot of people with, say, a more avoidant adaptation, who have attachment rupture that's caused that. When one of the things I found really useful is reminding my husband, no, I have to be doing something like washing the dishes when we're having this intense conversation, because that my body needs to metabolize the information from my brain. So it has to be doing something in order for it to go in.
That's helpful. It's like
totally
that.
Agitated.
Yeah. Well, and I read and I don't know if it's true, but I read some apocryphal thing of Mozart, having his wife read to him while he would compose on the piano. So I don't know that I think that I would say I'm neurodivergent. Like if I had to, kind of decide, I don't know if I don't think my brain is the most typical one. And that's also from having lots and lots of psychiatric evaluations done too, and a psych file that's quite thick, and multiple diagnoses and medications and things over the years too.
So over the years, have you had, a few different therapists then, or have you been pretty lucky where you've had some consistency? Like, how do you feel about your relationship with therapy and how it played a part in your, the development of your psyche?
I was really lucky. I eventually landed on a therapist, Anya Hunter, who I think is still practicing. Who had a real strong kind of Buddhist underpinning in some of her, cognitive behavioral stuff. It was pretty heavy cognitive behavioral, which now I kind of understand to, sort of be kind of limiting and even sort of problematic. I'm trying to not use that word anymore. But
I get it. Yeah, there can be real challenges for people experiencing trauma, and that particular modality can be very challenging.
Yeah, because I can't actually really choose my thoughts a lot of the time. I can choose my behaviors. And so, I sort of acceptance and commitment therapy was a better fit for me in the years that kind of came after. And so, yeah, Anya was awesome. Saw her for many years, but my meds guy was a nightmare. It's just the whole biomedical model is just so, it just pathologizes willy-nilly. And I would just go in with like a sort of what turned out to be a reaction to I was having trauma reactions to the public school system because it's so abusive. And I was also in a very arch conservative community, and I was who I am, as you might imagine. And it was also during a time of, a lot of the earliest civil unions, gay rights stuff came out of Vermont. And I was pretty active in all that because we didn't have jack shit for diversity except for, socioeconomic and sort of, sexual identity stuff. But, so I was effectively being kind of traumatized by public school and capitalism, and was internalizing that as to there's something really broken about me. And so I'd kind of wander into these offices with like, I can't sleep or whatever. And it was like, oh, well, and I would just walk out with a prescription, for like whatever. So there wasn't a lot of like, it wasn't a super holistic, approach. And I didn't have money to kind of do more, other kind of modalities. So.
And you didn't have a mom who could be like, oh, Rach, why don't you just come on over and we'll have some tea and you tell me all about it, right? You didn't have a compassionate witness who loved you and accepted you. And that makes me sad.
Yeah. It was really hard. I felt really orphaned, and I didn't have a dad either because there was such a massive rupture after my mom died. So, I felt very, alone in the world, and very sort of like the healthcare system is brutal. It's brutal on poor people. And, I was like on, I was definitely on food stamps and stuff, just trying to like, use public assistance to like not be homeless, and like try to function in the world. And, I was like, I'm a fighter, and so it's hard to sometimes know like what's an appropriate kind of rage response to what's going on, because it was I really had to claw my way into safety.
Can we bring this to kind of where you are today a little bit? Because I would imagine that 22, 25, 30-year-old Rachael would have difficulty believing the domestic circumstances she finds herself in today.
Yeah.
So can you describe what does your life look like today, Rachael Erickson, artist?
Thank you. I always sort of, I guess I should have said I'd never be rich or something, because I always said I'd never be a mom. I was like, it's just not ever going to happen. And I was also very clear that, like my relationship with my dad was so fraught that I was like, this shit stops with me. I'm not passing this on. I am not. And I saw because I had to kind of parent my younger sister, and I saw how easy it was to reenact, abusive type behaviors and stuff, and using force and coercion and all kinds of things that I saw, and was like, I'm not going to do this, with any children in my care. But I mean, I was also working with children. Like that's been most of my adult life has been working with children. So I really loved, that aspect of teaching and kind of learning from them, learning along with them. And a couple of years ago, I was in a long-term relationship with a musician, and I still, to this day, we're quite close and play music and gigs together and stuff. But we had been together over a decade, and we decided that we would explore like polyamory and opening our relationship. And we read some books and we talked to some people that have been doing it long term, and we got some skills and we tried it out, and we ended up not staying together, as is sometimes the case. I don't want to say it's always the case, because I think a lot of people do poly in long-term ways that you don't hear about it. It's like Yelp, nobody goes on Yelp and like puts a good review. You only hear about,
Right.
It's like if you Google Prozac reviews, you're going to get all the shit. And because, if something's going well, you don't advertise necessarily. But you hear about it when it goes sideways. So I just want to, shout out to all the poly folks that have been long-term and aren't, maybe as well known as the folks where it goes spectacularly bad. Not that ours did. Ours, we had a very kind of wonderful uncoupling or whatever, and it was all for the best. And I met this other man who has 2 children. I actually kind of cast a spell because I was doing some dating at the time, and it was a total nightmare. Oh my God. Well, I hadn't been single since like the last time I was single there, Facebook wasn't invented. Like I didn't have a cell phone, and so to be single at like 12 years later, with the advent of social media and smartphones and Tinder, and like I had a really good time. I got laid a lot. It was really fun. But I also really was like, oh my God, what have we done to the men in this world? Like, yikes. Painful, really painful. A lot of damaged folks from the patriarchy and stuff. But I met this man, and I had cast this spell saying like, okay, that's it. I'm done dating. Like I'm going to be just, whatever, like on my own for a bit. And that's all good. And if I do, meet somebody, I want them to have like a couple kids and like daughters.
Wow. You actually,
I wrote it all
that
down.
conscious thought.
Oh
wow.
yeah. I wanted them, they either needed to be an artist or a parent or somebody that had something else going
to ground.
And did not expect me to be their world, because like I'm actually, one of the reasons why my previous relationship was so great was that we both really had primary relationships, not with each other, but with the creative process. And so it left me a lot of room to just be the sort of compulsive kind of maker and thinker that I am, without having to perform certain gender roles that really don't fit for me. And so I was really hoping, and I wrote it all down, and I like burned a thing, and I called in all the people to help, and, on all the levels. And I went and I was like, and now I'm going to deactivate my online dating profile. And I went in to deactivate it. And I got a little message from this man who was, it was like the last message. And he was like, and I had a whole syllabus that you kind of had to read to date me. Like, I had this like checklist of like, I have read these articles. And, I was
to check that I agreed with these terms and conditions.
It was definitely, it was a TOC to date me. And I was like, all right, one last day, I'll go on one more. Like, fine. And that was a couple years ago. And now we live together with two daughters, 10 and 7 years old. And it blows my freaking mind, because I definitely wasn't signing up for that. Like we were supposed to be each other's side bitches is how it was supposed to go. I had a wife, I had a husband, like we weren't, I wasn't married to mine, but whatever, it was basically that. And the center couldn't hold. And so I kind of slid into the spot where, his ex-wife was, and it's a very strange shape. I feel contorted. And also, I get to be triggered a lot. And it was sort of like, I really wanted to avoid doing this work. I really thought it was too hard for me. I was like, that's not for me. I'm not capable. I'm actually not good enough or something. Like I'm not an evolved enough person to be a parent. And that might still be true.
Yeah. I'm like, is that a requirement? Because I'm already in, and he's 14. But
that's what I hear from parents that are bio parents. Thank God.
One thing though that I have noticed as a parent is as my child hits different age milestones, it opens up a flourishing of remembrance in me of being that age.
Yes.
So it's like you're just this constant scab that's recently been picked as you're, observing your child. But yes. I've also found that as I become the age that my mother was when she was making different decisions, I feel more enraged. Like, what the fuck? Like, why didn't you protect me from that? Why didn't, like, what the fuck were you thinking being with my alcoholic, stepdad kind of thing? Like, you had a lot of choices. And then I kind of come back to my senses and I'm like, does a person really when they're traumatized? No, like I can see the epigenetics of it. So I'm wondering, as you are in this role now of mothering, how is your relationship with your mother now? I mean, I can only imagine that it's paradoxical.
Well, I really relate to those sentiments of, when I see the girls in my life kind of, and I like there is that echo chamber of like when I was that age. And I also, like, my current partner, as is so often the case, is kind of a more healed version of my dad. And so his oldest daughter is a lot like my dad. And so we get to trigger each other in that way. And I definitely get those, like, why didn't my mom protect me? Why didn't she take us away? Why didn't she get divorced or whatever? She had the means. It's still to this day kind of this confounding sort of curiosity. And even yesterday I was just, God, I was so angry that I just don't get to know her as an adult, that I don't get to, like, have adult conversations with her. I wasn't an adult at 22.
And maybe she also could have told you now. She would have been like, yeah, Rachel, don't do what I did. Like if she was there to talk to you about mothering, she might look back on her mothering and go, oh my God, and you'd get to have that talk. Like, yeah, that must be really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it sucks. And she was an interesting person. And so I'm just like, man, I really didn't get to know her, as a person. I have so many questions. And, and as we sort of, as so many of us are kind of looking into doing like ancestry work, or, when you get into the death trade and you start reading Jenkinson, all this stuff, and there's all this push to kind of, look at your way back people. And, it's really challenging for me, because to have any kind of, the people that have answers to some of my questions are people that aren't safe for me to have contact with. And so it's this very strange kind of weird decision of like, okay, well, I guess I'll forego, or, this sort of access to some of these, memories and things, or, I'm going to have to put myself, kind of in harm's way, or I'm going to have to like really, kind of clamp down and protect my inner child and do all this kind of, boundary magic support, to have contact with like a certain, like a lineage that has been, just so deeply harmful I'm pretty sure it didn't get invented with my dad, like pretty sure it goes,
yeah.
A
And
couple
so now you're in the death trade, in the sense, as Jenkinson says, in the sense that you are a hospice volunteer. You're doing end of life care, just like your mom.
Yes. And I actually really, like, this kind of weird, but I kind of enjoyed, I don't know if the joy is quite right, but I really appreciated the depth of feeling that kind of went when my mom was really sick and when she was dying. And I really observed how there were such myriad reactions, and how some people just really pushed for business as usual, and some people really let themselves fall apart. I found that, to my surprise, I was able to kind of be with all of that without kind of making anybody wrong about it or whatever. And so, I remember reading Stephen Levine's Who Dies, which is one of my mom's, favorite books, as I recall. This was probably a good, let's say 7-8 years after she died. And I was like, this would actually be some work that I would do. And I remember telling my partner at the time, like, I kind of want to do some end of life care for folks. And then, like, it was like a month later that my partner's mom got really sick and ended up dying in our home. And I was like, whoa, I guess, okay.
You're super magic.
It's scary. Yeah. No, it's been like that. If they've had enough of that kind of experience in my life that I'm like, okay, it actually does matter how you sort of orient yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and what you call in and what you put your attention on and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so we took care of Melda. And then I did a little bit of end of life care for a friend's mom who was also, terminally ill and was dying at home. And I would just come and just kind of hang out and, read the New York Times and whatever. But I really found like that liminal space, those places of edge, out on the perimeter, like that's where I'm so comfortable there. I'm not in the middle being safe. Like I'm way, way on the razor's edge. And people that hang out on the razor's edge, whether they're, shamanic practitioners or heroin addicts, like people that are like getting out there, those are kind of my people.
Mm-hmm.
I really, for better or worse sometimes. Right.
Mm-hmm. And who supports you out there?
That's a really good question. I have some people in my life that are really grounded, and like my current partner is he can look at things in a way that's, he can see more conventional approaches and their merits, and sort of can see where I'm like pushing an edge that doesn't actually really need to be pushed. And so, my current partner is somebody that's like, really pretty grounded, and does not have like, I don't know if I want to say he doesn't have trauma, but doesn't have the kind of clinical aggressive childhood trauma with associated diagnoses like complex PTSD and stuff that I have. So he's able to kind of be like, hey, actually, this isn't an emergency.
That's so lovely. What a wonderful quality to have.
Yeah. And I have a dear friend who's a coach, and I have some people that are able to like, that will actually stand up to me, that will actually be like, hey, you're wrong about this.
Mm-hmm. And you still have your art, which is what I find amazing about following you on Instagram and Facebook is the vastness of your skill. Like you just have such a broad, there's not a piece where you can go, oh, that's Rachael, except every piece you can go, oh, that's Rachael. Like you don't have one style.
Yeah,
where
it's confounding.
It's so, you're chameleonic, you can style flex, but it's almost like, I mean, from hearing what you're telling me now though, right? It's like, you can see that this is an artist who, here's my interpretation. Would you like me to just give you a back of the napkin interpretation of Rachael?
I welcome the reflection. Clue me in, because I don't know.
Yeah, no, but this is obviously a person who's had to become a very astute learner about human nature and what touches people. It's like, people's buttons, the way you can speak their language to them. And so that ability to capture what other people will naturally be able to project themselves into, and what kind of opens up their special places, that kind of the thing, the feeling of yearning or desire or appreciation. You can read the audience so well. And this is one of the skills I think that you learn as a child of an alcoholic, is the ability to learn the many, many different languages, because it's like, which version of me do you need me to be so that I can keep either myself or everyone else safe, or so that I can just manage you in this particular mood or expression or this particular rant, And so it's, other people would more succinctly just call this emotional intelligence, but I think it's an aesthetic. I think it's that you understand the aesthetic of many different states of being, and you manage to speak the language back out into the void, right? Like this is a language that people understand who are in this state of being, and I just love it. I love how varied it is. It's just so beautiful.
That's an amazing reflection. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
It gets in the way of me monetizing my work.
I guess because
it's hard to get pinned down.
Yeah.
I'm not and I made TBH, like I made dream catchers for a bunch of years, and I was that girl. Right. That was kind of my deal. And so, I don't really have beyond that. I don't have sort of, like you said, a signature thing. Although if you look at a piece, you can be like, oh yeah, it's, made that.
Totally.
But it's definitely hard for me to choose. I get very, I get really cagey when I sort of have to think about drilling down like niche marketing and all that kind of stuff, I really like, I bristle. It feels very, and part of it is that I think I have used psychedelic medicine. Like I've used a lot of plant medicine to, kind of, go out to that periphery and, traverse some of those like liminal realms with plant medicine, psychedelic support. And so it feels very kind of flat and opaque or like one dimensional or something to me to sort of have to, pick a style or pick a medium. I just really like being slutty. I think it's valuable.
Well, and I'm glad you don't pick.
Thank
So
you.
as we're winding up here, I'm very curious. I mean, I know that you are unabashedly yourself, and sometimes that might cause friction, but that's different. Being a truth speaker or an accountability holder or a steward of what my Scottish ancestors would say, the fitness of things,
Mm-hmm.
the way things ought to be, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, this isn't a good way of being. But that's different from rage. And I'm very curious, how do you express or cope with the feeling of rage?
Mm. Well, I wonder, I think about my mom sometimes, and I wonder if she had a lot of unprocessed rage and how toxic that might have been for her system. Not because you invite, through law of attraction, this kind of illness or any sort of bullshit supremacist ideology like that, but more just like your body's really stressed out from, ungrieved and acknowledged or unprocessed rage. And so it's kind of been, that's always kind of been in the back of my mind. Like, my mother would, squash all of that down and just pile a bunch of like circus peanuts and Dr. Pepper on top of it. Like that's how my mom dealt with the things. And so I have to, like, I have some accountability around the things that I go to when I'm in, deep rage. And it's everything from just like not going for the Dr. Pepper and all, but sometimes I do, but I have a health coach and I text her, like, I'm like, here, I'm gonna use this substance or whatever. There are occasions that I go and like buy $1 worth of tobacco at the finest tobacco that you can get. But I get a very small amount of it and then use that until I'm actually sick and done, and I'm like, that's not the healthiest. Like, these are some of the things that I do, but, the most important thing that I do is to not do anything. If I'm really deep in rage, like it's a feeling, it's like the weather and it'll pass. Like, I know it'll pass. Like in terms of the actual, just when my body, my physical nervous system is just absolutely on fire, then that's a very strong signal that I actually need to slow way down and don't hit send on the email, don't hit publish. Don't raise my voice. There's a sort of like, I've done enough kind of therapy and healing modality stuff where I'm like, I work some 12 steps on it sometimes if I need to. And it's like, what's my part, in this? Where can I clean up my side of the street? Where did I, maybe need to kind of look at my own stuff? And mostly just like restraint. Because in 24 hours, I'm going to be pissed about something else probably, but it might fade and I might have a bit more of a cogent, even handed kind of response to it. Cause I can be really like, if I'm in the throes of it, it's not time to act, but sometimes rage just happens from confusion and I just need help making some decisions, what do I do, so like I talk to people that are way smarter than I am. That's really important. People like you, people like my health coach, like whoever, or through the I Ching, like go, really sit and just like be on fire. Or I write, I definitely use writing, like, thank God for writing. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that the actions that you're taking are the kind that are, it sounds like they're more gentle on yourself than they might have been in the past.
Very much.
Happy for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay. Like, I also don't, I don't know. I can reinforce a narrative of brokenness around the rage stuff. But I've kind of understand that, I come to understand that this is a pretty natural response to a pretty like messed up world that sensitive, traumatized person has to navigate. And just to know that like the what it takes to be successful requires such an extreme extraction of emotional and intellectual labor from me, and even physical, that rage is actually a really appropriate response.
Totally understandable. Yeah. And in many ways, I think a very healthy one.
Yeah.
I get enraged when people are not enraged.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't have to see a person's rage. You don't have to be like busting shit up all the time, but show me you care. Right. So thank you very much, Rachael, for coming on the show and showing us all how much you care through your art and through your activism and your way of being in the world. Thank you very much for sharing it.
Well, thanks for letting me honor my mom and the beauty that can come in death and doing death work. And death is life. We're all here because things died, and that's who we are. So I feel much more kind of plugged into my medicine, talking about this stuff and doing this work than I ever have before. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell sort of a little bit more of my backstory about how I got here. I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carmen.
Well, what more is there to say other than, isn't she lovely? I find her honesty so inspiring. And what a resilient person. I mean, I suspected, but didn't know the details of the road she's walked. But it doesn't surprise me that Rachael has managed to turn it into such beauty. She's a channel for something magical and radical. You should really go check out her art on her website, rachelrice.com, and you'll find links to her Etsy shop and her Society 6 store. I do own a Rachael Rice original, and actually I'm super stoked because we're collaborating on something that she's going to release, I think, around Christmas time, but there's a special version of it coming for students of the Numinous School who are getting care packages in January. Anyway, I digress. Society 6, I would like my husband to know that I have my eye on some of the watercolor agate pieces in the Society 6 shop for Christmas, specifically the agate #1 rug. I'd like to display that in my office as a wall hanging. I think it would look very nice in the background when I'm doing Skype sessions with clients. Thanks so much to Rachael. And let's do a shout out today to the listeners in Oregon. I mean, I can see your faces in my mind, at least a half a dozen of you that I know listen very regularly. I haven't looked at the stats in months. So I don't know how many, but I know there's some of you there that are very loyal listeners, and I totally appreciate it. And thank you. Thank you so much for your continued support and being in my world. Finally, just a heads up that the deadline to place your deposit to come on Quest with me next year is April 15th, 2018. Get all the details at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.